Hello.
Hello.
Disappeared.
Let's see if Paul is here. Yeah, here we
Hi.
are.
Oh,
We're all
Hello.
here. Hi. Thank you.
Hello.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. We are super happy to present this artist talk with artist Yasue Maetake in connection with our current solo exhibition and microscope, the transmutations, that it's on view until March 14.
I think I hear feedback somewhere. Was that's not our screen, right?
That's fine.
Okay. Now it's fine. Sorry.
And Maitake is joined in conversation by artist, critic, writer, curator, Paul D'Agostino. I'm very happy to have you both here. Hello.
hi.
Before we get started, we just want to say to the audience, welcome, and also that following this discussion, we're going to open it up to a Q&A with you, and that right below where the screen is, you should see a live chat. It's moderated. You're welcome to answer to submit questions or comments anytime, but we won't be addressing them to the audience until after they finish, so as not to disrupt the flow of tonight's conversation. And we hope you'll participate, as it makes us all more interesting. And yes, so
Let's start.
take the floor, or whatever people say when you're online.
Okay. Well, I guess that is turning things over to me, and that's fine. I have, well, thanks for inviting me. I enjoy doing these things, and I definitely enjoy my ongoing dialogue with Yasue. I've known her work for a number of years now, and I've seen it in a lot of different settings. And hopefully I'll have a little bit of time to comment and ask questions about this particular setting, because this is quite different from many other places where I've seen her work before. And probably it was an interesting process of installation. So I have some questions for you guys too. You're not off the hot seat. But Yasue, I'd like to talk about the show in a kind of internal sense, and then in an external sense, and then maybe in a tangential sense, talking about materials and process up front, and kind of the work, as it came into being and as it existed prior to the exhibition, and then some concerns about the exhibition as it took shape and as you installed things. And then if we have time, move on to some questions about other ideas in the work beyond perhaps the bodies of work, or questions about settings and things like that. So it'll all be very obtuse and maybe annoying. So hopefully by then the Q&A will have taken over. But so let's start with the practical stuff, the stuff that has gone into these two different bodies of work. For everybody who's tuning in, the show is called Transmutations, and there are two primary bodies of work in the show. One is symbolic atmospheres, correct?
Yes.
And the other is lineal fetishisms, and that is lineal, like Lineal. And I'm happy that you chose that instead of linear, because it's weird. So it makes you stop on it. And so before getting to titles and things like that, there are 11 works in the show. For Yasue anyway, small and medium scale. Yasue has worked at quite enormous scales as well. And I've been able to see a lot of cool stuff like that. But these are a little bit more oh, I don't know, sometimes pet size for some of your works. Yeah, but materials, bodies of work. One is from 2019, one is from 2020. It's two totally different worlds in terms of the obvious. So I wonder what went into those two bodies of work. If they were driven by materials, which in Yasue's work can be rocks, seashells, metals, brass, silver, copper, piping, all kinds of implements that are welded. There are bones, bone fragments, whole bones, wood, and they come together in these really interesting conglomerates. But I know that in your work, it's sometimes a new material that kind of will give life to a new body of work. You know, like in a general aesthetic sense, we can see a linear evolution of your work, but there's usually some new material or maybe a little bit of a different approach or process that then becomes a body of work. So can you talk about these things with relationship to these two bodies of work?
First of all, my impression of your question that how you see a sort of distinction between 2019 and then 2020 makes me a bit surprised, because in my head, they are absolutely continuation of my just a regular practice. And if anything, that it is really handed to the audience how they perceive that the difference. So it takes time for me to realize, see those distinctions through the lens of the audience, that how they can appreciate the different character between the two, especially the exhibition setting right now. There is no any clear addressing what is a group of 2 years ago and what is a group of this year. So it's totally convoluted. And
well, just to clarify, I meant that the world was two completely different things from 2019 to 2020, not the work.
Uh-huh.
I mean that
I understood that.
Yeah, the outer circumstances, you know, from 2019 to 2020, outside of your studio, outside of the work, is what I was referring to. So I wondered if any of that kind of fed in, you know, the general crises of 2020, if they entered into your work in any way. That's what I meant.
There is
totally what you mean on an aesthetic level, that the two bodies of work speak very readily to one another. Absolutely.
Maybe I started off kind of my unusual case of this particular show, that frankly, I never intended to create a sort of series setting of the work. Of course, aesthetically, it's my own control that viewer can appreciate my natural character or aesthetics come to my work, but intentional like attempt to try to create the series of work, it's kind of a first time in my life, I would say. But of course, it was not a set decision at the beginning, that it also naturally evolved that way. But at some point that I realized that maybe this is worth pushing to create a conscious setting of the series making. And then, of course, in the beginning was more immediate available, accessible material around my life. Around my life is not necessarily everyday domestic setting, but it's more about the raw material residue from my previous artworks, or like simply discarded waste material or found material, or even a new purchased material, just a regular extension of my studio practice. And then, so it was typically animal bones. I used to use often, almost back in 10 years ago. But at some point that I cut out this sequence and then waited to come up some new idea for a while. And then in the meantime, that several years that I used a completely different material, as you know, that steel or more typical resin synthetic stuff. But when I just pay attention those leftover material in the corner of my studio, that I just started to build sort of maquette or like model making in terms of the scale, which is unusual to me compared to my regular life size or a little bit bigger than life size object or sculpture making. So it was an attempt of like like a tabletop size scale of my natural, like I wouldn't call test piece, but sort of the experimental piece, like. And then of course, physically, like when the scale down, that it's more like casual attempt that I can have more control within my site instead of the overwhelmed like bigger scale in front of me. So then I naturally started like originally, like in fact I was thinking only one piece, but then maybe I started to be a bit more ambitious, that what is next. So then I started to make maybe 5 to 6 pieces first, and then I see the natural like trend of like certain aesthetic, because I stick to the common material within this beginning of the series. That is my more like kind of the series that you are referring, like in the beginning of stage, like typically 2019. And like literally speaking, that earlier sequence, I was more focusing on like granite stone, or of course animal bones. I was trying to refer some sort of the combination of like lifelike form, of course, and in combination of ruin, architecture, or like sort of the landscape, so that you can see in this earlier work that there is an element of architectural element, structure, more linear, not in the sense of the, the new title of linear fetishism's linear, but I'm thinking that like formally, like linear structure, architecture was involved. And then last year, 2020, it just, I see, like even this is my own work, but once I step out from my subjective like engagement, that, and then after spend some time to take a distance to look at the history of 2020, that obviously I was more ambitious and then get greedier to just blend into more other element of material, and then noticeably, of course, reflective metals such as copper and then brass, and then sourced from the plumbing pipes. And so I see the natural evolution of some even other common artist traits, that once things are minimally structured in earlier work, that the next step seems to be like more sort of involving the ornamental elements. But I wouldn't call that these are just matter of decoration, but it's just a more visual stunning, like effect of like visual spectacle, even within a small scale. So, and then of course color. color gets more noticeable in the later work. But still, instead of like choosing the artificial pigments with my decision making of placing the color palette, that I am still sticking to the trait of sourcing the natural coloration through the chemistry of reaction, and then like using the synthetic epoxy, or like seashell was a kind of play as well. Like if the audience can notice that a lot of tiny elements of seashells are involved in the later work. So seashells has natural coloration, like especially pinkish hue to the orange and then purple. So it gets just visually richer in a way. So
However, I
I'm
just want to point out,
retrospectively trying to recall my process as much as I can right now. So I'm basically describing my history of process.
Right.
but I just want to point out that number 6 of the linear fetishisms is one of the most, let's say, it has those, you already are starting to use the, let's show it actually, you're already starting to use the reflective, it's the twin piece, where you're already starting to use the reflective metals and seashells.
Well, I think the fetishism is the newer body of that is one of the things that came into the newer.
Oh, sorry, I
the
made a
newer body.
mistake. The symbolic atmospheres, the final one, which is number 6. Can you show this?
Oh, so you're saying it could be like the gateway piece?
Yeah.
With the added sheen. Yeah, I definitely see.
This one.
I recall when Yasue started bringing in the radial elements, the kind of like pipette pieces. I remember specifically some posts that she put up, and they're totally striking, and they made me really think of some of the references that she makes in talking about her work with relation to the Baroque specifically, because I immediately thought of Saint Teresa, like the ecstatic mode in sculpture, and they were just within the context of Yasue's work really striking, and especially because they had such sheen and such polish. And I think it's really wonderful where you talk about bringing in color, that the palette becomes just identifiable. It becomes a real presence because of the polish. In a sense of when the presence of metal doesn't necessarily manifest as chromatic, as palette. It is, but you almost have to step back and say, oh, right, we're also looking at color scales and values and things like that. But yeah, I mean, there's a palette to all of it, from bone to wood to whatever. But the polish really draws a dramatic amount of attention to that the potential vibrancy of that color. Take away the tarnish, or take away the age, or take away the natural accumulation of other chroma on top of it, and it becomes blazing. So I think that was a really wonderful step, and so that's very interesting that Elle is picking out that last, or whatever, that one symbolic atmosphere as a kind of gateway, because you're kind of hinting at the sheen, or the palette, as Yasue is referring to it, as being, well, wait a minute, here's where we can kind of find the pathway. Cool.
That bringing a particular piece, which we often talk about, how my inspiration was literally come from Bernini often, and then that particular piece was really strong reflection of that my excitement about Baroque or Bernini. And yes, thanks for reminding that piece, because in fact, just chronologically that belonged to the 2019.
Mhm.
But I forgot about it. Yeah, if I have to mark the date, of course, checking the calendar, that technically belong to the 19. But it was produced quite later, like in the later parts of 19. So it makes sense that from that point that I started to have more ambition to bring that sort of coloration as well. Yeah, so it's interesting.
Can you talk about, before leading into some questions about the exhibition, can you talk about the titles of the bodies of work? Because I know that you talk a lot about how there are implied molecular cellular movements going on in the work, how they're not static, how they might be seen as creatures, which I think a lot of viewers would agree with, at least with some of the work. And yet the titles for the two bodies of work don't readily relate to such individuality or particularity. Lineal fetishism, the title for a body of work, seems to lie outside of kind of character. And symbolic atmosphere almost seems to suggest everything else, as opposed to the piece itself, although we can talk about the piece itself being its own atmosphere or creating its own.
Right.
What gave rise to those titles?
Yeah, actually, I'm a little getting a little nervous when it comes to the title issues. The other day, I was talking with other studio visitor that actually he was surprised at how I am not paying attention to the creation of the title. And it seems that for him, it's obvious that title is not such a crucial, important aspect of my work in me. But of course, once I put some name, that started to work by itself, that it gives some other narrative and then hint the imagination to other people. So then I feel that it's almost out of my control, that if I can satisfy their excitement linking with the language title to my work. Title is one of the hardest task for me to decide. And then honestly, I don't want to destroy everybody's excitement or expectation of my, linkage between the title of the work. But if I can, that my wish is that perhaps just to put the old serial number to my work. To that extent, that for me, title is something completely, in a way, tough trial to think about it. But unlike certain type of the formal style, or simply certain type of the work, that I understand that my work needs some sort of more specific narrative guidance, just besides my own wish. So then I try to figure out the titling hard at the end. So besides this excuse, yes, symbolic atmosphere was more referring my general ongoing interest, relationship between my taking as a metaphor or symbolism of reality of this world and the gravity. We often talk about it, that how I see the gravity. It's not just a matter of physics, but it's more about my like the metaphoric version of like reality and then truth of this world, that there is no way to cheat or disguise or manipulate. So it's like sort of the symbolism of the truth. So atmospheric, this world, it's related to some sort of aerodynamic or air and space. So in the beginning, that as opposed to the larger than life scale or typical my life scale object, which I can involve my physical trial to appreciate and then sense the burden of the gravity, where how I work, that figuring out the freestanding form on the ground with a very challenging posture that I consider neither a fighting against the gravity nor acceptance or surrender with the gravity. It's rather a reconciliation of the gravity, that I am basically trying to negotiate the mutual agreement with the gravity. So when it comes to the larger scale, that of course I can justify that aspect of my interest toward the issue of the gravity or symbolism of the gravity. But when it comes to a smaller scale, this end up being more symbolism or illustrative aspect of my interest towards gravity. So this is why the word of symbolism come to me, that simply referring something that is turning into an illustration of my general interest. So symbolism and the atmosphere. So atmosphere is again like, my usual extension of my interest of like gravity, aerodynamic. And then linear fetishism is a kind of a big jump, seemingly very segregated from those gravity issue or physical presence. If anything, that my ongoing recollection of certain concern of history of the sculpture in general, like back into my earlier period in New York, starting as a student, beginning of my getting into the fine art world. Just at that time, the timing was sort of, the contemporary art scene as a whole, that there is a trend, backlash against the object itself. And fetishism, this word was quite hindering in my mind, because the whole theory taught at the time was quite heavy, intense, like arguments against the object, like the materiality itself. So then,
Are you talking specifically with relation to sculpture?
Sculpture, yeah, sculpture,
Okay.
or maybe painting some extent, but painting is, of course, very different sort of institution that can't necessarily compare. But the sculpture is in a way a very vulnerable medium, in the sense that it's so encouraging to let the people to think that basically everything is sculpture. Like, I am not, I shouldn't, branch out the topic right now, but maybe we can come back. So simply, so now I talk about the fetishism and then linear, these parts. Linear is not the like line or like
Mhm.
reference of the like form and then geometry. It was just my research to find out this word that referring something very legitimate and
Mhm.
orthodox, that has a very like approved background of some succession. So it's often used for maybe for somebody's family or culture. So
Mhm.
that is my understanding, if it's correct. I don't know what the reality that whether this terminology of what I'm referring is a first definition of this word or second or third, I'm not sure, but I just pick up this word. The reason I combine these two words, creating as a title, is that linear. So it's such a legitimate label of fetishism. So fetishism, whatever the refer in a art history. Of course, art history fundamentally comes from the Western art history. So then I was questioning that why my obsession towards this fetishism turned into almost as a struggle to justify what I'm doing, and then why I am sticking to the object, and maybe coming from a slightly different background of culture, whatever in my case, and then the meaning and value of the object and the physicality is completely different context where I'm from. So then I didn't want to necessarily follow the term of fetishism as the people use as a norm, like standard definition.
Mhm.
So I
Mhm.
wanted to emphasize that fetishism is something legitimize my natural background where I'm from. So in a way, like cultural issue was, input into that my current series, and it's blended into some complex of cultural issue some extent.
Mhm.
But I am not necessarily blasting this idea as my primary interest for this series. But if someone asks a question like now, like if there is an occasion that
Mhm.
I just speak up that why this idea come from.
Mhm.
So in other words, that such a non-specific object in general I'm making, it's a all blend of formal concern, cultural concern. So it's a mixed complex that I just hinted to, more formal aspect in the earlier work, and then later work turn into more referring the cultural issues. So, but essentially my interest is not, shifted to because of the title, but I just took opportunity that the title issue is like sort of another blank space that I can play or hint, allude my another aspect of myself. So
Okay.
then I just blend it.
Well, then the word transmutations then suggests something very different, which is again the title for the exhibition in total. So let's move on and talk about the exhibition and maybe some of the bigger ideas at play in your work. Now that we've talked enough about materials and process and sort of bodies of work and things like that, let's get inside of the exhibition. Again, you have 11 pieces. I'm assuming that's a selection from each body of work. One piece is freestanding to an extent anyway. It's the one piece that isn't on a pedestal. So you've got these plinths, you've got pedestals. They're gleaming white. The exhibition is in a gleaming white space with a gray floor. It's very different from a lot of other exhibition spaces that you've dealt with before.
Yes.
I know that at times you don't like to have the challenge of transform the space for us because your sculptures have such agency, sometimes also size, but such agency to do that. And I know that, that can feel like, well, I don't know, it can feel as much praise as, exploitation of a kind of work or something like that. So I know that sometimes that's a concern for you. Some of the spaces that you've shown in have had so much character that the spaces themselves become part of the exhibit, because they can't not, to an extent, like you can't not be cognizant of a certain kind of space when you're in it, especially raw industrial spaces, things like that. You're not hyper aware, but you're very aware of spaces like that when you're experiencing a fine art exhibition of whatever sort. So to respond to that, or even to not respond to it, you almost can't get around it. What's really interesting about the show at Microscope is that I found, as much as the space totally recedes, in a sense, the exhibition space, by being so other, by being so different from the work and from other places where I've seen your work, it almost has more of a presence, in a very indirect way. It kind of becomes a different kind of protagonist in the show, at least in my mind. And I could talk about that, but that's not really of any of interest to anyone at the moment. I think what is of interest is what were the considerations that you put into transmutations. Obviously, with the exhibit, you wanted to imply already from the title, and with some of the material that has gone out with the show, that these things have a sort of living presence as well, that they have an individuality, whether they're from bodies or not. They have that they're animated, perhaps in some way, that they have a life process of their own. So when it came to choosing things for the exhibition, and when it came to conveying that idea through the works, what were some of the things that you considered? And did you consider already how different the space was going to be to work in?
I know what you mean. It is different from what I used to show time to time, whether raw industrial space or like this time, it's a character. So whatever given the space, the sculpture is really, as I said, that vulnerable, but at the same time, very generous medium that with the frame of the space, sculpture can finally complete. So, by bringing first of all, like just transporting, like bringing all my current piece into Microscope gallery space. Even before setting up those installation, my first impression was that, wow, how much texture and then color has in my work. In other words, that my fabrication studio where I make those series was much dimmer and industrial workshop. So then I was, of course, aware of the form, balance, and sort of a color texture, but I think I perceived completely differently. And then once I brought those pieces in extreme white cube and then, pure space, then I got like at the end that I got another new level of inspiration, even though the body of works are already completed. So that then the final retouch, let's say retouch of my work, it's of course the setting up the installation. There are so many options, of course, like whether maybe I will fabricate very unique design table to coordinate my piece, or pedestal can be a different color. But there was a discussion with Ellen and Andrea that maybe pedestal can be can be matched to the floor color. So there are so many options. But yes, I took the opportunity that if it's so wildly like white and then pure, like a sort of incubator space, then I took the opportunity to further stretch that white purity of like crazy stretch to just spread the white pedestal, and then just to try to highlight the body of work itself in a sense that it became, I realized that this is my first attempt again, that whenever I was given the space that, as you know, that I strive to create some sort of a scenography within the space in a different way. But this time, this is still a space design, but just to maximize the body of works character that we can appreciate much better when they approach in a closer distance. So,
but also, sorry, I want to speak up here. I think that your works against a white background, as we discussed many times, that's when you really see them in many ways, because there's so much white in these bones and seashells. There's so many little subtleties that against the pure white, they stand out. If you stick them against colors that aren't white, then that, it's not that they have to be that way. Other things might stand out, but in this case, especially the bones come forward in their various textures and colors with that contrast.
I think it's really interesting that you bring up that you see things more, or that you see certain aspects, because what struck me is this indirect clinical setting. And so like it has that aspect, let alone the gallery's called microscope, but it has this sensibility where it's positioned and circumstantiated in a way that makes you look as hard as if you're actually examining something. And I've seen many shows at microscope. Not all work presents like, it's this very intriguing polarity between the kind of work and the setting that really makes you focus on that. And so the reason I say that the space almost seemed to have more presence is because it suggested this whole other narrative that, you know what I mean? Like it suggested a clinical setting. It suggested people in lab coats or with clipboards or something, like it suggested a different kind of viewer scrutiny. Lab coats or not, it suggested this different scrutinizing act of engaging with the work that I really like. And so that's kind of what the pedestals seem to do for me, is present them like here, this is basically the height at which you should look at this one. This one stands alone, which I think is just one. It's one of the fetishisms, number 5, I think. And it has its own natural wood base. So, you know, but it's kind of life size plus a bit if you're short like me. It's like 6 feet, I think.
Hang on.
Yeah.
It's interesting that how we talk about the space, you know, of course, microscope space is very, you know, refined and clean and beautiful. And it provides also a neutral, let's say, backdrop for the artwork. So, so I originally, you know, I praise, but honestly, I didn't necessarily recognize as a character. But at the end, by my decision or our decision, how we install that this clinical pure setting became a strong character, which people often think that white cube as a almost antithesis of the character. But I am very happy that I almost highlighted this sort of the setting as a character. Character doesn't mean that the unique, some non-art space or unexpected space.
Right.
So why not white cube as a character? So I think I maximize that, you know, forgotten aspect of what the definition of the white space.
I wonder, and this is a question for you and Elle and Andrea, if the selection, if I don't know how large both bodies of works are, but it seems like you might have been almost spare in choosing works, because it's a very large space. And I'm familiar with more or less the scale of the works. So, you know, I wonder if there was a lot of editing, you know, how it went into matters of arrangement and pedestals. Obviously, with you know, anybody can see from the installation shots that there's also a lot of consideration of how one work would work with a sort of point of view visual relationship with another work. Or, you know, if you're standing over here and you're looking at this one and you have these off on the horizon, is that maybe not an implied meaning, but did you pay a lot of mind to the different maybe symbolic positionings of pieces with relationship to one another and not just individually?
I would like to say something. I think that Yasue and the two of us kind of have similar approaches, which is to kind of like, we don't plan the way an exhibition looks in advance till you get the works in the room. And there's a lot of people, I mean, not a lot, but there's certain types of artists who that's a stressful situation. Or certain curators, that's a stressful situation.
Yeah, you make the maquette.
Yeah, but we always feel like until you see things actually in the room, you can't know what it's actually going to be. And so that was because that became very kind of easy, where like Yasue was walking around, we were moving. I mean, it was kind of hard because these pieces aren't you know, things that like a painting that you can just kind of set up against a wall or something. So but it just came together very organically with the three of our eyes. And yeah, we were thinking about how do they react to each other, but not overthinking. You know?
Oh, yes.
It just came like a puzzle. I mean, it just formed itself. That's what, I don't know, Yasue, I think you would agree with that.
Right? I agree.
Yeah.
Well, you are suggesting that I should start thinking about the layout, that my first just hidden my rule imposing on myself is that not overthinking. Exactly as you said, that not overthinking was what I was trying to achieve. So yeah, like realistically, it was quite quick.
Yeah.
We say that let's begin, and how it was less than 1 hour.
Yeah, I know it was like an hour. Yeah, it was
Yeah,
almost
about yeah.
with the little tweaks and changes. Yeah,
I know.
yeah. It's kind of crazy how it just happened.
Yeah, but
also,
I think at the end, I am very happy about the layout, that it is very successful. I can see from the viewers, visitors, like traveling, that they are totally engaging and making efforts even to go around every corner of the space. I generally strive for the scenography and the space design for the show, as I said, but I think this time also it seemingly very formal pedestal setting, but the level intensity of the viewers traveling distance, going through the all the way around to view my sculpture, and every corner, furthest corner, they go travel, and then that is that's things makes me so glad. I feel so glad, and then I feel that this is one of my achievement I felt. Yes, this is great, like really, like exploitation of every corner of space. Of course I intended, but not heavily, but just not by not overthinking, I intended. I'm contradicting, but
Yeah, well, I mean, I also imagine that it's exactly the kind of exhibition where, if I had been in a similar situation, as Andrea and Elle, bringing you in and having your works and having that space, it might have been the same thing. It could go either way. You have fun with it and it takes an hour, or then you go, oh, wait a minute, we could also do this. And then we could also do it. There are probably so many different ways in which it also would have worked, that you get into a place where it's resolved. And if it happens in an hour, it happens in 5. That's still relatively fast. You could go a week, you could have a different show every week, with the thing sort of moving around the space in yet another felicitous arrangement. Yeah, I mean, it seems like it was probably a fun show to some extent to install, probably not to carry up the stairs, but like it was probably exciting to get that work in there. And I trust it's a great exhibit to live with, while you guys are at work, and that it's a neat one to watch people engage with. For sure, it's difficult to get people to look hard at anything, really. And so if even if it's a painting on a wall and you see them engage a little bit longer than the customary walk by and glance, you see them actually pause and and maybe gaze for a while, but to then get somebody to walk around a sculpture is a very different thing. And so for all of you involved, I'm sure it's been a great pleasure to watch people actually circumnavigate.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, what I have to say is, first of all, part of this is related to the situation we're in, which is COVID, and we're doing appointments only. On the weekend, we are allowing some walk-ins if the room isn't crowded and people are comfortable with that. Mm-hmm. But that allows people to actually, they feel dedicated. They made an appointment to come see a show, and But even with the people walking in, most of them stay, and like you're saying, you've witnessed some of it, you've seen it. People are spending lots of time, and they are watching, because your works aren't made to be looked from. There's not a front, there's not a back, you know. So they're examining the whole thing. And someone I was talking to the other day was kind of like testing, okay, let's see if that actually works with every piece. You know, like I really walk around every piece and feel that there's multiple, that it works, and it's true. I mean, it is true.
Can I ask an unfair question?
Yeah.
Have you gone around the exhibit with the lights off, flashed your flashlight to make shadows and see how it works in some other, like done something, you know, after hours, right before you leave? And no? Okay, I used to do that all the time.
Secret in that we have spots on some of the works, you know, because the middle of our room is no lights. So we should have some lit up by spots.
Okay.
And so we've seen them like that in the dark, and seen the shadows. Yeah, it's very beautiful. In fact, someone walked in the other day before we turned on the rest of the lights, and they thought it was this purposeful choice. There were like 4 works lit by lights, and the.
Well, that's what's interesting is that like that subtle shift in exactly the same setting with the pedestals and everything, like that would create a totally different protagonist out of the space. It would then become a museum. You know, it would then become not like a sort of examination room scrutinizing, if somebody wants to consider that anyway. Because I think that you can consider the space kind of as not there, you know, in an extreme way, because of how much it diverges from the work. And if not, then there's another extreme where the space actually seems to have a real agency. Like there are actors involved in that process, if you start imagining it. So that imagined thing leads then to another couple of questions that I think I'd like to pose to all 3 of you, but also maybe the audience.
I was just about to say, audience, just start submitting their questions because we're getting to the end of this part. Yeah.
Well, I think that maybe we could get their feedback, like from everybody. You can just send it in a text or something and blow up their
we have a chat below.
Their chat, blow up their chat. Because my question is, Yasue's work implies a landscape, or it implies a sphere. I think I'm not alone in always seeing her work in a place that is sort of where these things live, or where they came into existence, if by some sort of extreme passing of time and sedimentary layers and, you know, material evolution. You know, they're in some future, or they're in some other time. And to me, they're in a sort of landscape, and it's a kind of landscape that, you know, I envision in a certain way. So my question that I think I can pose to everyone in the audience, and maybe they can answer the chat, is in the chat is, in a couple words, in a few words, what is that setting like to you? If her work seems to imply a different time setting.
And one more, I just wanted to refer the wonderful phrase you told me before. I remember you said that circumstantially installational. Do you remember?
Yeah.
That is actually, that words inspired me a lot. I never intend to create an installational piece, even though at the end, the piece end up being more installational at the show because of the process, like, trying to complete, trying to achieve the sort of completion at the space, so that I am like quite anxious until the show setting is over to consider my body of a piece itself, the completion. So circumstantially installational, this word is still, always in my mind during my making the actual body of work in the studio, so that I always consider that, the moment of finishing my work is not the actual.
Well, you've referred to your works as having this kind of implied that there's an organic sense to them, that there's a living sense to them. So what I wonder is, if in your imagination, do you imagine that these pieces, here's what I mean, if these pieces actually lived, or if they autonomously, out of the creation of your hands, if there's a world in which they come into existence, which is another thing that we've talked about with relationship to your work, like emerging out of a, the works almost seeming to emerge out of their own process of structural unification in some way, of structural integrity. Where is that place? What time is it? Is it in some distant future? In your mind, does a place have a character like that? Because I know what it's like in my mind, but that's just me as one more viewer imagining a sphere for these works. It doesn't matter if I see them at microscope or if I see them at a different space. When looking at and thinking about your works in general and on an individual basis, I don't necessarily associate them with that space. They always manifest to me as in some other landscape, in some other time, where I don't really know if, as a viewer, I'm a human. Are there humans there? Or if not, what is there? Is there still cryptocurrency? I'm kidding.
It's kind of, I understand what you are asking, but it reminds me your description itself hints the idea of unending present, or a sort of moment of timelessness. That is indeed my interest as well. And whether I am imagining those some circumstance for future, the answer is kind of a blank. I am not necessarily imagining anything in terms of the physical surrounding and environment of the actual discrete body of work. It's totally pending. But it doesn't mean that white neutral backdrop, like a practicality of photograph documentation, what is the color and the character of the space, I even cannot describe necessarily, but it's in a limbo between the a space, no color, no shape, nothing. It's just fleeting by itself. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, the process, I'm not necessarily using the process as my primary concept, but the process is really crucial timeline, how I spent with my work. I am not necessarily intended to strategic metamorphosis or transformation, but yeah, just something evolving
Mhm.
desire that wanting to become something else other than what I am trying to depict, intend in my mind at the beginning.
Okay, we just want to say that we're starting to get some questions.
Okay.
Sorry, but we had originally thought we were going to talk for about 40 minutes, and now we've been talking for interestingly for
50.
70 minutes. So I just want to make sure that some of the people here get their answers, if you don't mind, and then we can go back. Do you mind?
Mm-hmm.
So here's a question that we're going to read. Andrea just posted it. What is it?
Actually, Kyoko from Kyoko. Thank you for the talk. As you were talking about gravity, I really liked how all the sculptures are balanced with gravity. Do you have the shape you want to make in your mind from the beginning, or are you adding more parts while you construct the sculpture to balance it, so you cannot predict their shapes until you finish?
Answer is both. Depending on the piece, some pieces just in some pieces case that just to flash one visual idea come to me and I follow to that, not necessarily in the illustrative sense, but pretty much concrete some shape comes to in my mind. The other type is a tedious exploration of constructing the material assemblage. And then some pieces can be combination of both.
Is it true? I mean, I might know this answer, but is it true that you often work by hanging when you hang the works while you're making them? They're not made from the floor.
Mm-hmm.
Whoa, secret sauce, everyone. That's 11 herbs and spices.
Hanging.
It's not supposed to be the secret sauce. I'm sorry if I'm.
No, I'm kidding. But no, it's really cool that that Kyoko's question brought that up, because that is a really neat aspect of one way of finding a gravitational center or something, you know, finding a sort of resonance. So I think that's a very interesting aspect of her work. I'm happy that came out.
Mm-hmm. I mean, when it comes to tabletop size, like typically in the piece in the show this time, they don't need to hang necessarily, because just practically the things can be manageable without hanging and making a special device to begin with. So the process can be different, you know.
Okay, another
Are
question.
there other questions and comments?
Yeah.
From Griffin Ryu. Hello, Yasue. I'm curious to hear the answer to Paul's question about the process of editing or selecting the number of works for microscope space. Were all the 11 works in the space originally, or did you add or subtract from the number? Thank
Okay,
you.
well, let's just be clear that the show is curated. So
It's
yes.
a collaboration.
Yeah, it's a collaboration on how many works were in the show, and there were works subtracted.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's the answer.
No.
Yeah. You can talk too. Yeah, if you want. I guess the question's more about was there more work in the series?
Yes, series.
Yeah.
And of course, there is a curation amongst those, you know, series. We selected the work.
I think we can all appreciate that the show is curated. I don't think anybody's implying anything else.
No, I didn't mean it like that. I just meant there's selections.
I mean, curation means a selection, right? Yeah.
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 One more, Paula. Hello, Yasue. I'm new to your work and I look forward to seeing at the gallery. Could you please say to what extent digital art has influenced you? I ask only because while it is fundamentally far different, it's nonetheless hard to imagine your pieces existing outside of a concurrent digital world. Is there
Oh, there's
some
a second.
intentional symbiosis?
That's amazing. 'Cause she makes video as well.
Ah, right.
Yeah.
Digital. Yes, I do make some video work. Yeah, that is technically digital work. That's true. I didn't think so much comparison of digital versus physicality. When come to my comparison video work and then physicality, maybe it's not the exact answer to her question, but the between two different media, obviously like film, video versus sculpture, the huge difference is that whether one has like orchestrated beginning to the end, and then the other it's total one presence of everything. And yeah, that's how I am aware of these two different mediums. And then that helps a lot in a sense, always comparing with other completely different medium or art form. Oh, yes, like even video again, but in painting or drawing, fundamentally they have, people call window, but the frame to segregate the like imagination or expression within a confined, arranged box. The other one can complete at the show, mean that show space as a frame. So this comparison is also an important play for my being very conscious about the sculptures practice. But digital, it's interesting question. Maybe I shouldn't prolong my answer, but I just something come to my mind that I don't know if this answer is relevant to her, but it's not about my intention, but just the generation and the history changes, so that how the sculpture, how perception of the sculpture also changes. When I say that sculpture is a physical object, like regardless of any people's background, whether outside art world or anybody, I just noticed that like kind of my parents' generation, when they saw my sculpture, they think that maybe it's crazy abstract work that my parents wouldn't understand what it is, and then they enjoy, but they know the how to interact with the physical information, that obvious things such as stone is heavy, paper is light, glass is fragile. So based on this appreciation that they approach to those imagery, that how this is crazy or interesting or unique. While those generation who are very used to pretty much trained into the digital media and the digital world, interestingly that their feedback response is that looking at my work as if this is a magic. This is a very traditional physical work, but for those who are so used to and then drain into digital life, for them the physicality turned into a magical fantasy. So it's become opposite. And then I don't try to control their perception, but just they naturally bring those impression, how they perceive. And I am just a spectator in this case, that I am listening them and then observing, and then I entertain myself by this feedback. I don't know if this answer is relevant, but just how I feel about the comparison with the digital platform.
No, it's very interesting because I think you're right that the people are getting used to seeing 3D animated materials, and it's confusing things, especially since we've all been in lockdown for so long.
Yeah.
Things digitally.
Well, there's also just a lot of great kind of conceptual potential in thinking inside of a digital sphere, inside of a digital space, a sculpture coming into being and doing the things that sculptures can do in space, having many of the same aspects, except that physicality, except that weight, except that kind of gravity, but kind of observing a lot of the different aspects of sculpture within the space, so like adapting everything into a virtual space for the quote unquote virtual sculpture. What does that become? I mean, that's just an interesting place to think. So, probably a lot of sculptors would throw me out the back door for suggesting that there's a potential in it. But, I think it's interesting.
Yeah, those things are really out of control of creator and then artists, in a sense that the generation and then the world decide what's the definition of certain media. Simply the physical sculpture is something that is turning into so-called fantasy now. It's become opposite. Used to be a reality, but now, maybe not yet, but nowadays it's a kind of transitional period that physical sculpture is a fantasy or virtual. That's how I feel from the people's feedback now.
Here's another question. Do you want to read it?
It's more of a comment from Stephanie. I found the surfaces fascinating. For example, the way the bones were so carefully worked to selectively expose the material. The sumptuous of the materials made a strong tension with the surface degradation.
Oh yeah, we didn't talk about that so much, how you manipulate the surfaces through sanding and grinding and sometimes letting things corrode. That was something that wasn't mentioned today.
Oh, right. Maybe whoever look at my work physically can see just several kinds of treatment of surface. For example, comparing to the more rougher surface where I left the raw stage of bonding materials appearance as it is, versus my grinding and polishing, smoothing out all these connected bonded materials, so the surface becomes texturally seamless, but still there is a residue of those color or texture material information that I embed. So it turned into like sort of marble effect. So seashell, epoxy glue, and animal bones. Imagine that if these are like all combined together through the adhesive component, and then I just grind all together. So then it's a seamless surface, but we can see those information still. And then furthermore, if I polish further, then it also brings some aspect that the color can be more stressed. Like you can imagine that if you spill the water on a stone, that the impression becomes stronger or more vivid. So that is the effect of the polishing manipulation, that by polishing the surface, that even bone can be like stressing a little bit more yellowish aspect than we think, more whiter in a rougher surface or something like that. And then of course, obviously, like metal has a whole range of the stage from corroded surface to the polished surface. So there are so many different variations within the same material.
And yes, and so many of them are present in these various, each work. Like each work, like you were saying, is a completely different work. Despite using so many similar materials, just in terms of just start there, you know, with the way you handled the materials in each different piece. So we've been going on for a long time.
Right.
We like talking, but the show's still going on till March 14th. So there's still plenty of time for people who are in New York to come by and see it. We just want to stress that we are doing it by appointment only and taking social distancing and safety measures very seriously. We're also open to people who can't fit the hours, which we're open 5 days a week, which is Thursday through Monday, 1 to 6. If for some reason those hours are impossible for people, we will consider, we'd like to accommodate people if we can, for special appointments as well. Now we're getting a slew of comments. So let's, no? Yeah. Oh, okay, sorry. We were looking at the wrong place.
Any final remarks? No.
So nobody had an imagined setting. Okay, sorry, it was a dumb prompt. My bad.
Good question, yeah. I think that from our experience in artist talks, people are a little more shy than in our like screenings or something. And possibly that's because this is public. You know.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Whereas.
And recorded.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm making that up. Oh yeah, you're recording it? Cool.
Oh, that's good that I didn't know this is recorded at the beginning.
For posterity.
The dynamic, of course.
I mean, we don't have to make it public. We thought we would leave it up with your permission for a few days, or at least to the, you know, for people to watch if they missed it. But otherwise, this could just be it. It's, you know, we'll talk after.
Okay.
People, anybody out there have something else to say?
I think.
Okay.
Well, thanks to everybody who tuned in.
Thank you.
And thanks Microscope for inviting me, and thanks Yasue for, you know, considering me as a somewhat useful moderator. I imagine.
Of course.
I proved you wrong, but.
Yeah, thank you so much, Paul. It was very nice chatting with you. It's all extension of our conversation, and it was so natural, and I can talk more, you know.
Yeah.
But we can regroup at the end if you want. Also, Paul, we're really happy to see you. We haven't seen you in so long.
I know.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Paul and Yasue.
Thank you
everyone for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
It's been a great talk.
Bye.